Welcome to the newest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. In today's video, we'll talk about NASCAR's return to the Rock with the Trucks and Xfinity Series. Plus, since I put out my quarterly review video on Wednesday and took a little time off on Friday, I wanted to share a few notable news items from last week. So let's start right there and go back to a story I wrote Wednesday on Athlon Sports. I'm sure you all heard about Kyle Larson's remarks on Kevin Harvick's Happy Hour podcast and wanting to embarrass the Xfinity Series and show the drivers in the series that they're not as good as they think they are, and there's always room for improvement. Well, on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio, he was asked about those remarks, and the Hendrick Motorsports driver once again didn't hold back.
Really more just like when I get in the Xfinity car, they're a lot of fun, and I love racing them, and where those comments kind of stem from a little bit is just that, for so long, I think, fans, I guess, call them fans, complain about Cup guys running Xfinity races because it was taking wins away from regulars and this and that. So then NASCAR listened and limited Cup guys from running Xfinity races. And then, I don't know, so I like to get in there and let me back up. When I was a full-time Xfinity guy, I loved that the Cup Series when Cup guys would run, and they got to run every single week. So, it really pushed me to become a better race car driver because, I could compare myself to them. I could race behind them, learn from guys like Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano and Matt Kenseth and whoever else. I even raced against Jimmy Johnson in an Xfinity race. So I felt like because of that, once Xfinity guys, or even back before me, Busch Series or whatever, those guys, when they came to Cup, they were ready for Cup because they were competing with Cup guys every Saturday and beating them or getting beat, but regardless, they were learning. Well, now we don't get that. So, Xfinity guys, I don't feel like are as good as they once were, and definitely not as prepared for Cup as they once were. I think that's why you see, a guy like Ty Gibbs. I really like Ty Gibbs. He's an Xfinity Series champion, but he's yet to win a race. And, I think a lot of that comes from just the limits that NASCAR's put on. So with that being said, when I run Xfinity, I want to smash the field just so they can see where the bar is really at, because they have no clue when they're just racing with each other every week. They might think they're good and think they're ready and all of that, but until you get out there with a Cup Series guy, you just don't know. So, I like going out there and leading races by 10 to, almost 17 seconds at Homestead and just showing them that, hey, you guys are doing good, but you have a lot of work to do if you want to, be ready for the Cup Series.
I thought it was really interesting to hear his comments about Ty Gibbs and saying he's an example of what's wrong with the Xfinity Series and not developing drivers. Staying on this topic, I want to jump ahead a couple days to Thursday, when Parker Kligerman was on the channel, and he responded to Larson's comments. Take a listen.
I thought it was awesome. I love that. That's the kind of conversation you usually have with your crew guys or, friends, and you're like, I'm going to embarrass them sort of thing. And he just let it out to the public, and I was like, hell yeah, I love that. Why not? If that's really his intention and his motivation for being there, I love it. And it's super cool. And as a guy who has raced against Kyle, who has, looked at his data, I am never not impressed. I'm always sort of blown away. I've had times where I've raced against him and had that moment in the car thinking, how in the hell is he doing that? And, that to me is why I believe he's one of the top 3 best race car drivers in the world. And I've been very vocal about that. I'm a big fan of his in terms of his driving talent. And I think, he displays that often in a variety of different cars and tracks and that sort of thing. And I think, the other day at Bristol, Adam Alexander and I were in the booth, and we couldn't help but laugh at some point. He was obliterating the field. It was damn impressive. On the flip side of that, I think 5 is correct because I also lived through the era of when it was unlimited Cup drivers, and as a young driver that was trying to move up, it was really hard, almost impossible, to get more than a couple starts in any sort of significant car in the Xfinity Series. And, you know, I think there's numerous rides. I think the big machine ride I was in the last 2 years would not have existed if there was unlimited Cup drivers. You know, if Cup drivers would be able to be, you know, in these races unlimited. So I think it's worked. I think it's allowed the series to build its own identity. I think you have a strong series in terms of numerous drivers and teams that this is kind of the highest level they're going to go to, or that they want to go to. And they're making a career and a living out of doing this and being in the Xfinity Series. And I think adding in, you know, unlimited Cup drivers would possibly erase that. So I don't agree that needs to go, you know, we need to go backwards. I think this was one of the smarter things NASCAR did in the last 15 years for that series and to help it have its own identity. I appreciate when they come down and they do things like Kyle Larson has done. You know, at Homestead, he had a massive lead at one point, wasn't able to seal the victory at the end, but, you know, he really was, once again, putting the hurting on the field. And at Bristol, it was really impressive as well. And I think that's fun every now and then, but I definitely don't want to see that all the time. And I don't think that's representative of the skill level of the Xfinity Series. I think it's, you know, a guy who's one of the top 2 or 3 best drivers in the entire world in really good equipment, going into a series full of, you know, people that are trying to get to his level or just, you know, very early on in their careers or, you know, this is the level they're going to get to, right? So I don't think, you know, there's any reason to change that. But, you know, I appreciate his comments. I love how open he was. I know he's one of the best in the world, and it's super cool to see. And I think it's super cool for, you know, the younger drivers, the Christian Eckleses, the Jesse Loves, the Nick Sanchez's, to get the chance to have a weekend where he shows up and say, okay, that's the level I need to get to. I get it. Now let me go back to work and, you know, let me focus on trying to beat the guys I'm around and who I'm racing for a championship. And then, you know, when that person dips back down again or I get the chance to move up, I'll, you know, get to assess myself once again. But, yeah, I don't agree. Adding Cup drivers unlimited would just, I think, overall be a hurt to the series, and I think you'd end up in a similar situation of the early, mid-2010s where young drivers almost had no chance of getting rides.
No, I think we're on the same page. Certainly respect Kyle Larson, respect his opinion. I did find it interesting. He's complaining about not being able to run more than 5, but he's only running 2 this year, but that's a whole nother show.
Interesting points made there by Kligerman, and also an interesting little point made there at the end by Larry Mack on Larson only running 2 races when he wants NASCAR to open it up to running more than 5. Curious to hear what you guys have to say about it in the comments section. Moving on to a couple of other news items from the week, and one of those was 2003 Xfinity Series champion Brian Vickers breaking his social media silence. After stepping away from Cup racing due to health issues in 2016, Vickers still found himself in the headlines because of his wife, Sarah Kellen, who he married in 2013. Kellen was the former assistant of Jeffrey Epstein and has been named in multiple lawsuits and accused of being the lieutenant who helped Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell procure hundreds of girls. Vickers and Kellen lived in a 3-bedroom, $10 million penthouse of the Mercer Green Building in New York City, where Vickers was the president of the condo board. Last week, he announced that he was getting divorced and as a result, coming out of digital hiding. He said fans can expect a bit more action out of him in the coming months as he's back on his digital game. It'll be interesting to see exactly what that looks like and what he has to say. Another news item on Thursday was finally the announcement of the release date for the second season of NASCAR's Netflix docuseries, Full Speed. It will debut on May 7th and includes 5 45-minute episodes. I've been honest with you guys since it wasn't released before the season like last year in Season 1, and shared how I think it's absolutely ridiculous to expect fans to care about it with such a late release date. Now we know that date, and it's going to be 11 races in, or almost a third of the way through the 2025 season, to get a recap of the 2024 playoffs. I reached Netflix, and they had no comment on the reason for the later release date. I also reached out to NASCAR and have yet to hear back. We'll let you know if I do. Which takes us to Friday and the Truck Series race at Rockingham. As you guys know, I regularly interview Frankie Muniz after each race and recap his weekend at the track. I expect to have that video up tomorrow. But I want to talk to you about the race in general. First of all, it had to be the biggest crowd by far for a truck race this year, and that was really great to see. And those fans in the stands saw an entertaining race for sure, with trucks moving around the track, passing, and in the end, conserving fuel. For those watching the race at home, we were also intrigued by the passing and fuel conservation strategy. Unfortunately, we were subjected to Fox's broadcast, and per usual, it was bad. But the end of the race was next level bad. Now, I know there have been plenty of you who have not been happy with Jamie Little as the play-by-play announcer in the booth these last couple of years. Many of you have said how great she is as a pit reporter. I completely agree with the latter. She's really, really good. But that final lap at the Rock was something I couldn't ignore. How bad was it? See for yourself.
Last pitted on lap 112. The others behind him, last pitted on 119. They're out. He hangs on. How slow is he going on this final lap? Checker flag is in the air. He gets it done. Tyler Ankrum, your winner.
Little didn't even realize that Ankrum was coming to the checkered flag. And then she calls out the checkered flag is in the air when he's already close to turn 1. Could it have been the result that she was 90 miles away back in Charlotte at the studio calling the race instead of being at the racetrack? Listen, I really try to understand Fox not wanting to send its crew to races, say maybe here in Texas or somewhere where it requires a flight and a hotel stay. But this was a little over an hour away, and this is what we get as the end result. An absolutely embarrassing call, and just another reason I can't wait for Fox's coverage to be done with this season in the Cup Series. Just 5 more races. Unfortunately, we'll be stuck with this nonsense for trucks for the rest of the year. Which takes us to Saturday's Xfinity Series race, and once again, it was action-packed. How about to the tune of 15 cautions? It was really cool to see drivers struggle making their way around the mile-long track, including Casey Kane in his return, getting loose early on in the race and narrowly avoiding a crash. Unfortunately, he wasn't so fortunate late in that first stage and suffered severe damage when he was collected in an accident with Catherine Legg, who was hit in the rear by William Sawallich. And once again, like Friday's race, this one came down to fuel conservation in the final laps, which also included a couple of red flag delays due to crashes. On the final overtime restart, Jesse Love moved Sammy Smith up the track, moved to the point, and took the checkered flag for the win. Or so we all thought. Hours later, NASCAR announced that the number 2 car had failed post-race inspection because of a rear suspension violation and had been disqualified. A, I was surprised it was almost 4 hours later that they made that announcement, and B, I thought Love's response to it was funny when he took to X and wrote, quote, "Good thing my house has a safe," end quote, and included a trophy emoji, suggesting that NASCAR won't be getting that hardware back. I almost forgot to mention the Xfinity race was also a packed house and great to see. I know I heard an interview with a Rockingham official on Friday, and he said that a big crowd and good racing would be the 2 main objectives to get on the radar of a possible return of the Cup Series. I think they achieved both of those in a big way. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens in the future. All right, guys, that's a wrap on today's episode. I want to hear what you thought about it. First, let's go back to Kyle Larson's remarks on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio about Ty Gibbs and the Xfinity Series not properly developing its drivers. Agree or disagree? And what did you think about Parker Kligerman's response and how he wants to keep it as is, and Cup drivers have a maximum of 5 races they can run each year? Next, what do you think of the Netflix docuseries Full Speed coming out on May 7th? Are you going to watch it, or do you even care at this point? And finally, what about that racing at the Rock? Did you enjoy the races? And I have to ask, for those of you who watched Friday's Truck Series race, what did you think of that last lap call by Jamie Little? Thanks again for checking out the latest video and as always supporting the channel. I really and truly appreciate it, and hope you have a great rest of your day.